So, hi everyone. I just start with a very initial explanation that my topic is totally different. I assume from previous and after discussions. It's all about a kind of challenging an attitude in a practice of architecture and urbanism. So it's more than talking about a very specific kind of software or application or a kind of digital technology. It's going to challenge why they, this, this attitude is absent in some areas of social working. So the topic is gamefulness and cityscape, and I start with this very short description that it's an interdisciplinary phenomenon and it's going to challenge the absence of game digital capabilities in urban practices. So I'll just start with two quotations which have motivated me to think more about the use of game in my field, which I'm a urban designer and planner. So Richard Duke has defined game as a language of the future, and he just defined this definition in the 1970s and brought the concept of practicing game in the architecture and urban practices. But Shakespeare, in his play Coriolanus, has told what is a city but its people. So when we combine these two concepts, game and city, I can analyze and reach to this conclusion that there can be some methods in which the city can be played by the people. So what is a game? A game is a system in which players engage in an artificial conflict defined by rules that results in a qualifiable outcomes. The system is a set of parts that interrelate to form a complex whole, and conflict and rules are formal elements of a game and outcomes of goals. But what a game design means. Design is the process by which a designer creates a game or a context to be encouraged by to be encountered by a participant from which meaning emerges. So when I talk about cityscape, as the topic is gamefulness and cityscape, and gamefulness, as you know, this word is not in the dictionary, so I've built it. I mean, how to enhance the game thinking in the cityscape, in the practice of urbanism. And when I talk about the cityscape, it's not just about the landscape, the view of things that we are normally know about the pure definition of cityscape. It's all areas which we are encountering in cities, from housing to social insecurity, the conditions of disabled people, urban degradation, sewage and sanitation, resilience and sustainability, child labor, traffic jam, vandalism, which some of them which are common words in the practice of urbanism all around the world. So gamefulness, by very initial definitions, I can say that gamefulness and cityscape can reach to a consensus in the meaning here in this slide. So why gamefulness in cityscape is really matters? Because it can tackle the crisis of participation in urban issues. It can add a new layer in data-driven analysis. It can facilitate the process of problem solving collaboratively, and it can consider more public initiatives in the process of thinking. So gamefulness is an apparently playful but serious data-driven and collaborative method to reach unorthodox proposals that open up novel insights for the designer, for the urban practitioner, towards considering something that they may never consider before. So you can see some pictures here. There are very normal and conventional games in the practice of, as social games in the practice of urbanism.
Nima, we're having an issue on our end where we can't see any slides changing. Would you mind just changing the view so you're just looking at the PowerPoint window?
Let me please. What about now?
Yeah, that works.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, so with previous slide, which I mentioned that participation is is an inherent part of the practice of urbanism. So I'm going to talk about more about participation. Participation in urban projects addresses the need for knowledge, action, and consciousness. So by knowledge, I mean the research which affects observable decision making. So players should have the knowledge of playing, and the action is playing, what they play. I mean, action looks at who is involved in the production of such knowledge. And consciousness is how the production of knowledge changes the awareness of or worldview of those involved. So uh, in this slide, you can see game as a toolbox. Game can have a different praxis in the urban areas, in urbanism. It can be a kind of decision making, scenario writing, prototyping, policy making, role playing, or narrating and storytelling. And it can be formal, informal, serious, or non serious. But different goals can be targeted by playing games. It can be used for planning, to co-design, teaching, or research. As you see, there are different themes and also different scales that games in the practice of urbanism can be applied. In different subjects like environment, physical development, the local governance, societal and cultural issues, or economic considerations of the city, and in many different scales from streets to neighborhoods, or in a whole city to a network of cities. As you can see in different pictures in this slide, the game can be applied. But as you see in this slide, uh, there are different city game interfaces. One of them are card games, and the other is board game. When we talk about card game and board game, they are very, they can be our favorite too. We are familiar with these kind of games, card games and board games, as a kind of hobby, or which can be played as a kind of urban tool too. Or it can be mobile games or video games, which nowadays are growing and being more popular. But I think it can be a characteristic of the urbanism and architecture that we have hybrid games, in-person games, and web-based games. When we talk about hybrid games, it means that we can combine, for example, card game or board games with video or mobile games. Or when we talk about in-person games, it means that we can do it in urban space, in a very physical environment. And web-based games are those that players, that I mean by players, citizens, the people who are affected by Cityscape, can have access to a very special link and play the rules of the game that is defined in that link. So here I want to have a very brief review of digital game evolution, which can bridge my previous discussions to digitalization. In 1960s, Sega was founded, and the first coding of a video game occurred. In 1970s, home consoles entered the market and rapidly grew. In 1980s, games flourished as a creative medium, and in 1990s, consoles finally took over from home computers as the systems of choice for many gamers. But it was in recent century, in 2000, that 3D gaming continued to evolve, and it was in the first decade of the 21st century that gaming truly went mainstream. But after COVID, gaming as a kind of online practice found its way and is now more popular, and it can be practiced more than every time. So I want just to as I'm talking about interdisciplinary concept of game and cities, I want to briefly talk about the rationality in encountering interdisciplinarity. Uh, so, in the practice of urban thinking, we usually take system thinking and design thinking. When we talk about system thinking, it's a holistic approach of seeing things from a broad perspective of overall patterns and cycles, rather than just specific events in a system. But in design thinking, we grab a creative problem-solving method and try to find novel, out of the box, unorthodox methods of solution finding. So design thinking focuses on synthesis and system thinking on analysis, which is very common in the practice of architecture and urbanism. In this slide, I'm going to rationalize the concept of designing a city game. When we talk about city game, however, regarding to the above picture, which again is consisted of mechanics, dynamics, and emotions, and it means that it must have rules of playing. It must pay attention to the player's behavior and take it into consideration, and also have a thorough analysis of the player's emotions to consider in which context the players are playing the games. But in the city game designing, first of all, as a very traditional method of problem solving, first of all, we should define the game challenge, what issue we are going to tackle, and then engage the player network. Who are going to play? Is it for a specific city? Is for a neighborhood? Is for a whole city? It is going to address environmental issues or economic considerations? Is it going to land to consider land use planning, or is going to have a broader view? So after identifying the players, we should find the data and identify the available resources. By defining the game rules and conditions and building the game interface, we must play it. So after playing the game, we can recognize how the game is working and if it can be used as a method of architecture and city planning. So we are all familiar with the concept and the phenomenon of human-computer interaction. So it seems that when we talk about games as a very popular phenomenon, and so we should talk about human-game interface interaction, and we should know that game represents realities by means of metaphors or graphical demonstrations such as maps, arrows, flows, emoji, icons, photos, logos, and signs are potential metaphors of a game. So in a city game, we can use these metaphors to change very basic elements of architecture like map or data and other resources to metaphors which can be playable by the game players. I wanted to challenge the absence of game thinking in architecture and urban practices. But I need to focus here that in future prospects of practicing an interdisciplinary combination of game and city, we should have a thorough attitude of system thinking, digital thinking, and design thinking. It means that we need to grab urban models, to define a kind of interface, to have a definition of human-game interaction, and also we should have a game design attitude. It means that game design is a means of problem solving in architecture and urbanism. So 3 categories: game, human interaction, arts and media, history, story and cartography. And storytelling and game writing are the means, or the ingredients of defining and designing a game. When we talk about game-human interaction in cityscapes, in urban practices, I mean that I can use very conventional and usual methods of architecture and urbanism like AutoCAD, Adobe Flash, Google SketchUp, GIS, Cloud Server, Cityscape, to very specific environments that games are defined on, like Minecraft, Unreal Engine, and so on. But game in this regard can add real-world data and information like art and media, like paintings, photography, cinema, history like written archives, verbal memories, a story like codes, narrates, and a story to define a kind of storytelling in the process of game writing. So gamefulness targets in this presentation video game improvement as a practical design studio lab. It looks for interdisciplinary tools for serious documents in order to translate the new language of storytelling and game writing into the daily context of city life. And in my last slide, I tried to present 2 different pictures, and each picture has 2 different kind of game designing in the practice of urbanism. One is a kind of card or board game, and the other is how to translate it into the mobile app. So it's my really last slide, and the question is how to use digital capabilities and technological science in order to augment the gamefulness of urban practices as an everyday exercise. This presentation tries to highlight an interrelation between the concept of public participation with the help of game-like toolboxes. While the conventional method of urban practices are questionnaires, modelings, and mathematical formulas, game can bridge it into the new era of engagement. The inherent role of virtual reality, machine learning, and artificial intelligence in order to take the characteristics of realistic archival documents and bring them into designing real-world city games could help urban practitioners to enrich the cityscape. In this regard, a combination of digitalization and current architectural and urbanism software could fulfill the game mechanisms, while the urban practitioner has the role of game referee. Thank you. Yes.
So, as a moderator, Nima, can you hear me?
Pardon?
Nima, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear. Yeah.
Thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. I was excited to hear about the way that we could talk about the gaming within the planning of architecture or urban planning. I have 2 questions. One is would you say that the city itself is a kind of primitive computer, and that modern computers allow us to begin to reconstruct or recreate urban environments because the city itself has already been designed as a way of calculating and transmitting information, specifically the information that's needed for public utilities and for the orchestration of production. And the second question is, if, as you say, that system thinking is subsumed into digital thinking and digital thinking into design thinking, but design thinking is participatory and founded on problem solving, would you say then that the fundamental basis, not only of computers, but also the city, is founded on this notion of participatory problem solving, which is in a way similar to Platonic dialectic, that is, on the one hand, a way of asking questions and testing hypotheses, the other hand, a way of showing how the ideas that are meant to answer to those questions are framed within a network or system of ideas that are mutually implicated and related to one another?
So I think that the city has all elements that a game design needs. So when we look at the design rationale of a game, which has contents, ingredients, and the graphics which interrelate between these contents to present a phenomenon in which the game mission will be fulfilled. I think that the city has all these elements. But in my presentation, I try to focus on various elements which are available in a city and for city practitioners, which are mostly neglected in both conventional urban practices and designing games. So that was why I mentioned history, art, story, and cartography as methods which not only build the whole city and are elements of the whole city, but can be used in the practice and exercise of game. I'm not sure about your second question, if I get it right or not, but can you please repeat it very briefly so I can answer it better?
If system thinking is subsumed into digital thinking, and digital thinking is subsumed in or answerable to design thinking, and design thinking is a way of testing hypotheses or attempting to solve problems that arise from the conflicts that are of our designs, then
Yeah.
would you say that the way you think about computers and also the way that computers are somehow mapped onto cities and vice versa, that this is somehow an activity of dialogue or dialectic? And is it involved? I mean, is it in a most rarefied sense? Can we say that it's somehow the concretion or the reification of argument?
Yeah, I think that when we talked about system thinking, I think that the computer science to design a game needs this method of thinking to include all elements which are necessary. I mean, it's very broad. It's not only broad, but also tries to synthesize in a very holistic attitude. But in a design thinking attitude, I mentioned that we need in a game environment to have a very specific method of grasping unorthodox solutions. So the problem solving by help of games are very rare and unique. So yes, I think that the design thinking means here that the players have a very engaging participation role in the method of problem solving, in the process of problem solving.
Yeah, so thank you for that. But one thing that puzzles me about this movement between problem solving in a game context and problem solving in a city context is that often in games, people are working, the designers are working hard to generate artificial problems. So the example of the game I'm going to talk about later, Elden Ring's got some phenomenal cityscapes, but they throw all sorts of problems in by, forcing you to take a hidden long route to unlock a shortcut, and filling it with enemies and traps and dead ends and giving you some dwindling resources to manage. And so it's not clear to me how, this sort of problem solving that's very useful for the game designer is going to translate into actual city planning where you don't want any of these artificial problems.
I think that game in city planning is specifically and is a unique method of problem solving. And when I talk about problem solving, I mean that it can help all players, all stakeholders gather to have their voices being heard. So to help the game problem solving process be more attractive and more practical, I think that that was why I insisted on the role of a brand practitioner as a game referee. I mean that we need experts to analyze the outcomes of playing the games. So in city game designing, we need to use the traditional methods, like, as I mentioned, questionnaires or maps and data analysis. So the game designer, which must be at least an urban designer, or the urban designer must be in the team of designing the city game, can have a thorough analysis of the data which can be taken from the gameplay. So the problem solving could reach its way to have a impressive influence on the results that the city game designers have thought about.
Yeah, I have a question. This is super interesting, and it's making me think about how when you apply like a game design approach to city creation, you're making visible this like question and function of an author, like the creator. And obviously urban planners kind of inherently hold this power, but I feel like the game design approach really amplifies this. So I'm curious like how you're thinking about, could a process like this enable authorship to be distributed in unique ways? So I'm thinking about like cities today, how they're made. Could they become more communally informed? Could there be rules designed into a city to allow for players or people in a city to kind of contribute and redesign the rules by which an environment governs? And yeah, I'm curious about how you think of like community organizers or even like citizen science, like how this kind of fits into this framework.
So I think that we should categorize city games into two different groups. The first one is more general, and the second is more specific. About the second, I mean, it is related to a very specific area. For example, a street which have a very specific traffic jam problem. So the city is designed for that specific street or area. So the players are those who are residents or are working at that street. So I mean that the players are totally familiar with the environment. But in general, games, it can be totally different. So the concept of designing the game are totally different. But when how to include these issues that you mentioned in the game, it needs a kind of both, not only the urban experts must monitor the game playing, but also it should use a kind of hints and tips. So a kind of tricks, for example, in the game, which shapes the rules, the mechanisms that I mentioned in that graph, which the game needs a triangle of a mechanism, the player's behavior, and the mindset. So it means that we should know who are playing and how the reactions would ever be. So by defining some mechanisms and rules, for example, some awards or some sequencing the play into different chunks, we can have some pauses in the game playing and grab the outcomes that we are looking for. So yes, it can be by defining very very specific questionnaires or reviewing the method of playing that players has done. I think these can help the game to reach the realistic outcomes.
Thank you.